The Wood Whisperer is sponsored by Powermatic and Typebond. So after finishing up the long 4-part series on this desk, I asked folks if they like the longer versions of videos or do they like things to be a little bit more condensed. Well, it turns out the answer I got most was both. People want to have the option to watch one or the other, so that's what this is. It's the condensed version on making this desk, but if you want to see all of the details, the full 4-part series, we're going to put links in the show notes for that. All right, so thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy this shorter version of Nicole's desk. First up, we'll need to cut down the stock for the legs. I'll cut them at the bandsaw first, then mill them up to final thickness, width, and length. The legs all get tapered using a tapering jig at the table saw. We'll have a video and plans available for this jig pretty soon if you want to make your own. In order for the legs to tilt, we'll cut the same miter angle on the feet and at the top. At this point in the project, I'm not totally sure that I love the taper angle that I chose, so I think I'm going to sleep on it. Captain's Log, Stardate 98211.6. After meeting with my senior officers, I decided to leave the legs as designed by the Federation. Now we can cut the stock for our drawers and interior parts. These are all 3/4 of an inch thick. The aprons and drawer back are the same width, so we'll cut those down together, and then we'll add miters to the aprons. Next, we can cut the bevels on the inner drawer support pieces. The joinery I'm going to use is loose mortise and tenon joints via the domino. Using the domino saves me time and it frees up my brain to play with new designs. And it's not exactly a no-brainer for this project. It's actually pretty tricky locating the domino properly for each set of cuts. Now, if you're looking at me using the domino and thinking, well, that must be nice if you have a domino, but there are other more classic ways to do this. It's just called slip mortise and tenon or loose mortise and tenon joinery. And I actually have a video out there showing you exactly how to make loose mortise and tenons on angled pieces like this, miters, bevels, everything you could think of. And all you need is a router, a straight bit, and an edge guide. So go check out that video if you don't happen to have a domino or something like it. Once all of my marks are placed appropriately, I'll start plunging the mortises. Some of the mortises require a little outside of the box thinking so that our reference points are in the right place. After all the mortises are cut, I do a little dry assembly just to make sure that the parts go together properly. And that looks pretty good. At the table saw, we can now make the dados in the legs using the dado stack and a miter gauge. Using a shop-made sled, I can thin the legs out by creating a taper. The jig props up the feet and the material is removed from the outside face of each leg. This will help the leg look a little bit more delicate and less chunky. Everything gets a nice 1/8 inch round over prior to assembly. All the flat surfaces are then scraped and sanded. For the glue up, I'll use Typebond Extend. That'll buy me just a little bit of extra working time. I only need 2 clamps to clamp up this inner drawer compartment. After glue up, I flush up the tops where needed. Now let's make the shelves from some white oak. The shelves will be simple panel glue ups, so we'll mill the parts to size, just a hair too thick, and then we can glue up the panels. I use a set of cawls to help ensure flatness. The reason I left the panels slightly too thick is because the scraping and sanding process will remove a little bit of material, resulting in a perfect fit in our dado. The panels are cut to final size, and then we'll add a curve to each end. The shelves are then sanded thoroughly, and the edges are given a small round over. Now we can glue the legs to the shelf. And finally, we can bring together all the sub-assemblies. This glue up is a little bit tricky because you need to use blocks that offset the angles and allow the clamps to do their work. So I'll use 1 clamp with angled cawls at the back and then 2 clamps at the front. Now we can make our tabletop. I'm using 5/4 lumber, though you could get away with 4/4. Milling long boards flat eats up a lot of material, so that's why I like to use 5/4. On the last panel, I used wood cauls to help keep the panel flat. This time I'm using dominoes, and I'm only using them for alignment purposes. Now I can clamp it up and let it dry. I'll use epoxy to fill some of the knots and cracks. Tape on the underside helps prevent the epoxy from pouring out. When the epoxy dries, I sand off the excess. Using a template and a flush trim bit, I'll add a slight curve to the ends of the top. It takes 2 passes to get through the entire thickness of the top. The top then gets a chamfer on the bottom edge and a small round over on the top edge. The entire top is then scraped and sanded. Now I'll make up some cleats that will hold the top to the base. The cleats feature elongated screw holes that allow the top to expand and contract, and they'll be glued in between the legs and the drawer compartment. The top is pre-drilled, and then screws are driven through the cleats into the top. Now don't mind that wobble, my floor is terrible. Now for the drawer front, which I'll make from white oak. The ends are mitered and should fit in the opening with a 1/16 inch gap on each side. The drawer front is going to get some through mortises, so I'll make up a quick template to help with that. Using some 1/2 inch wide and 5/8 inch wide pieces with miter cuts, I'll carefully assemble the template so that the open areas represent the mortises perfectly. I'll then add 2 fences to the template so that it can be indexed on both ends of the drawer front. A drill bit can be used to remove the bulk of the material before attaching the template with clamps and holdfasts. Now I'll use a 1/4 inch flush trim bit and work my way back to the template walls. The corners still need to be chiseled, and my regular chisels will mangle these acute angles, so I take a cheap chisel over to the grinder and bevel the sides so that it fits within the inside angles. With the template still attached, I can chop down lightly to establish the outer edges of the mortises. And with the template removed, I can use the chisel to remove all the material that just shouldn't be there. I chop halfway down the front, then I flip the piece and work in from the inside face. To make the tenons on the drawer sides, we'll start by making a shoulder cut at the table saw. When it just barely fits, we have the right setting. The rest of the tenon cuts will be made with a handsaw. I use the template to mark the tenons with a pencil. With each cut, I want my blade in the waist, and I want the pencil lines to still be visible when I'm done. Now I can remove the area between the tenons with a fret saw. The outsides can be removed with the dovetail saw. Any material sitting proud of the pencil lines needs to be chiseled away. A quick test fit shows that we're looking pretty good. The final step is to pare away the rough material on the shoulder. And the final fit? Yeah, baby, that's the stuff. At the back of the sides, we'll add a rabbet. And now we can cut the drawer back to length. To make a groove for the drawer bottom, we'll make a 1/4 inch wide cut at an angle. Using the same blade but at 90 degrees, we can cut the bottom panel groove in the back piece. For the drawer front, we need to make a stopped groove using the router table and a dropped cut. Next, I'll measure for the bottom panel and prepare to make a 1/4 inch thick solid panel out of white oak. While that panel dries, I'll work on attaching the slides. I'll drill for screws using the elongated slots so that I can have some wiggle room in the adjustments later. At the case, we can attach the other half of the slide. The panel's nice and dry now, so we'll sand it up and cut it to size. The drawer parts then get a nice sanding prior to glue up. For the through tenons, I like to put glue on the tenons only in order to prevent a lot of tricky cleanup where the tenon pokes through. I'll put a little glue at the very center of the bottom panel groove so that the panel can still expand and contract. Then I can drop the bottom panel in place and add the back. Notice I'm using angled cawls again to help with the clamping. That's what we're looking for. Now we can reattach the drawer slides and test the fit. It's not perfect, but it's good enough to move on. We'll finalize the drawer fit after the finish. And speaking of that finish, I'm using a hard wax oil. If you'd like to learn more about this type of finish and the application process, I've got a video that you might want to watch, and I'll link to it in the description. And check this out, I forgot to add the pins for the rear drawer rabbets, so I'll drill the holes, drive the dowels, and then trim them flush. The great thing about a hard wax oil is how easy it is to repair, so I could blend this right back in to the already finished side. Now we can do the final drawer install. It looks like the right side is a little bit low, so I'll make a quick adjustment, and boom, that's perfect. Now we can add a few more screws to lock down the slides. Only thing left to do now is get this into the office and get Nicole's computer on there and let her mess it all up. And there it is. Now she's smiling because she's getting ready to dump a pile of sticky notes and video game knickknacks all over that thing. Overall, it was a fun project that occasionally tested my patience and skill. We took one angle and utilized it on nearly every part of this project. And it was fun getting outside of my comfort zone and trying something different. I hope you enjoyed going on this journey with me. Live long and prosper.